Alex Films presents True Stories. Narrated by Jim Harris.
I begin with a true story. If I were to ask you what is the worst shipwreck that you've ever heard about, most people would probably say the Titanic. And surely it was a bad one. Happened in 1912 and 1,500 people died in that tragedy. But the fact of the matter is, in U.S. history, there was one shipwreck worse than that one. Who here has ever heard of the SS Sultana? Most people hasn't. It was back in 1865, and what it was a steamboat. It mainly was hauling cotton and other cargo down south, back and forth. It had its regular route. But in April 9th, 1865, the Civil War had ended. Now, in the prison camps down south, the northern soldiers was being released and shipped back to the north. Now, the U.S. government was paying $5 per enlisted man and $10 per officer for any captain who would actually load their ships up and bring them back. It was a great deal. Now, understand, the prison camps during the Civil War was a terrible place to be. Actually, about 56,000 men died in the prison camps. They died of starvation, disease, of course, bad treatment. But it was a terrible, terrible situation to be in. So these men come out of the prison camps. They're still sick. They're still weak. But now they've got an opportunity to get back. What happened was there was an official military man come to the captain of the SS Sultana and said, "Listen, I'll make you a deal. I'll let you haul 1,400 men back to the north on one condition." And the captain says, "Well, what's the condition?" "If you will give me a kickback on the money." Well, that's a lot of soldiers and a lot of money. And of course, the captain says, "I'll do it." So what happened was he had to make one more run down to New Orleans. He had to unload his cargo. And the deal was they was to meet in Vicksburg, Mississippi, to pick up the men, and he got back there. So when he got there, there was a mix-up in the paperwork. Could you imagine that? Instead of 1,400 men, the paperwork says 2,100 men. My, what an overload of people. Now, here's the other problem. This ship, the crew was 85 people. It had the capacity to haul 376 additional passengers plus cargo. So now the contract is stated for 2,100 men. That means 2,185 aboard a ship that was only supposed to have 461 plus its cargo. Talk about being overloaded. It was very, very overloaded. There was another problem. In 1865 was a very bad year for floods, and the Mississippi River was up very high because of the, current weathers, and all the snow was melting up north and coming down, that the current was extremely heavy, and even normal conditions, you had to fight the current. So what happened was when they loaded up these 2,100 men plus the crew, they were really, really overloaded. They got to Memphis, Tennessee. And in Memphis, Tennessee, a boiler sprung a leak. They stopped there. They got a mechanic, and the mechanic come in, and it says, "Yeah, you've got a real problem here." He says, "Your boiler is leaking. It's got to be fixed." And the captain says, "Well, okay. How long will it take to fix it?" He says, 2 or 3 days. 2 or 3 days? I don't have time for 2 or 3 days. He says, "But it's leaking. It's got to be fixed. It could be a very tragic situation." The captain says, "Can you patch it?" The mechanic says, "Well, I can patch it, but it needs to be fixed. It could be very tragic." The captain says, "Patch it." He says, "But Captain," I said, "patch it." So the mechanic went down below, let it cool down, and patched it. and the ship was on its way again. It left Memphis, Tennessee. It made it 6 or 7 miles. It was about 2 a.m. more or less in the morning, and the boiler exploded. Now we've got 2,185 people on board. Some of them was women and children. When this boiler exploded, it threw bodies in all directions. Some people was burned up alive immediately. When it exploded, the decks collapsed upon one another. One side was on fire. The other side, with all the explosion, they had to jump into the river, which is in April, so it was very, very cold. And so some was burnt. They were already weak from being in the prison camps. And so they was trying to swim. Some was trying to swim to one bank. Some made it. Some couldn't swim enough, didn't have enough strength, so they floated down back to Memphis. And at Memphis, they pulled them out of the water. And they said about 700 people was actually pulled from the water, but 200 eventually died because of exposure and burnt. In that explosion, 1,700 people died. That's 200 more people than the Titanic. What a terrible, terrible situation that it could have been avoided had this captain took the time, took the expense, and had the boiler fixed or replaced. But he chose to patch it. Did it make news? Not really. See, on April 9th, Robert E. Lee surrendered the war. 5 days later, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Now, on April 26th, John Booth, who assassinated President Lincoln, was captured and killed. And on April the 24th is when the explosion happened. It was kind of like the back paper news. Terrible situation. Let me ask you a question. What is in your life that you've simply just been patching up? You know you need to fix it. It may be a marriage. It may be a relationship. Brother, sister, mom, dad, distant family, a job, friendships. It's not right, but you just been patching it up. And instead of taking the initiative and simply taking time to fix this situation, you simply just patch it up. It'll be okay. No, it won't. Because when we begin to patch things that needs to be fixed, there's coming a time when it's going to explode in your face. How tragic that how many marriages has been lost and nobody wins in divorces. Again, the relationship where people won't talk with one another. Close people who grew up together, either in families or in friendship, and over misunderstandings, money, whatever it may be, they just patch it up and they keep going. How sad. But let me ask you another question. What about your relationship between you and God Almighty? Oh, you know, I've been driving truck now for many years, and I've traveled probably 20-some states and talked to a lot of people. And when you mention the idea of serving God, almost everybody, I believe. Well, believing in God is not good enough. James 2:19 says, "Thou believest that there is one God, thou doest well. The devils also believe and tremble." Just because we believe in God does not mean that we got a relationship with Him. We know about Jesus Christ. We know He died for our sins. But do we take the time and accept His sacrifice, forgiveness of sin? Neglect. It says in Hebrews 2:3, "How shall we escape if we neglect so great salvation?" You know, it's bad enough to lose a marriage, friendship, relationships, jobs, whatever it may be, but to lose your soul. Are you just patching your relationship up with God, or maybe not even a relationship whatsoever? What a chance. A risk taker. You know, as you drive along the interstates, you ever see these dead birds along the road? buzzards, crows. And what they do is when something gets killed on the road, they land on the road and they're eating the roadkill. And when do they fly normally? Normally, they wait to the very last second to fly because they're risk takers. Are you risking your soul? Are you risking your marriage, relationships, your job, your friendships? Most important, your salvation. Because if we neglect our salvation, think about that. It says, how shall we escape if we neglect? My friend, if you neglect your salvation, either by not calling upon God for forgiveness or just playing religion with God, how shall we escape? You won't.